Welcome back to State and Local Government and Politics. Sustainability, Part 2, Infrastructure Renewal and Water and Waste Systems. The United States is without question a land of vast natural resources. In the past, these seemingly abundant resources were taken largely for granted. Beginning in the 1960s and 1970s, however, circumstances began to change as access to natural resources such as fossil fuels, water, fertile farmlands, forest stands, and wildlife habitat began to tighten appreciably. There was growing sense that the pursuit of sustainability meant more than buildings and maintaining durable infrastructure that could last for long periods of time. Conservation, historic preservation, and environmental protection all became increasingly important aspects of the policy landscape at the local, state, and national levels alike, affecting the way planning for the future was done at all levels of government. Today, some public policy areas featuring clear themes of environmental sustainability are making a favorable difference in the promotion of sustainability at the state and local levels of government. Clean water and sanitary wastewater processing and removal are very important functions of government dating back virtually millennia. In antiquity, population centers were nearly always established near a water supply for purposes of human food production as well as for direct use, that is, drinking, cooking, and washing. Waste systems were of equal importance. In this regard, contemporary forensic anthropologists provide ample evidence of how waste mismanagement contributed to a reduction in the public health with the introduction of preventable risks such as the stagnant water-related diseases like malaria and typhoid fever. In the 19th century, U.S. cities' untreated effluent typically ran in the street gutters, and trash was periodically disposed of by the practice of open burning. The potential for water and airborne disease was quite high given these conditions and practices. Highly communicable diseases such as typhoid and tuberculosis were common under these conditions. In the 1830s, New York City suffered a widespread cholera outbreak that led to the deaths of more than 3,000 people. A similar epidemic in the 1860s led to the death of over 1,000 residents. The New York epidemic was similar to cholera outbreaks in other urban areas in the U.S. Municipal sanitation laws were in place and were enforced, particularly during epidemics, and this was indeed a good thing. However, insufficient resources were available to the public health authorities of the day to cope with a growing population and a large immigrant class, in many cases bringing with them diseases contracted in other regions of the world or contracted during travel to the U.S. in confined ship quarters. State and local governments in the past often made social and economic choices that were beneficial to their citizens in the short run, but had unintended long-term negative consequences and created externalities, the transferring of costs to others for other jurisdictions. Spilling wastewater into a river downstream from a town, for instance, is one inexpensive way of removing waste for the upstream party. But this practice has the effect of polluting water for other users downstream, who bear the cost of cleaning up the water to make use possible. Powerful economic interests at the state and local levels often have the capacity to influence policy choices in ways that are personally beneficial, but which are inimical to community sustainability and long-term public health. For example, in many urbanized areas, industrial waste disposal in the streets was quite commonplace in the 18th and 19th centuries. To make matters worse, during this area the dominant mode of transportation, horse-drawn carriages, deposited mountains of animal waste in the streets. In the 19th century, sanitation and water services were frequently provided by private businesses operating for profit. For much of the 19th century, sanitation was a luxury few households could afford. The underclass continued to rely on community wells and often remained at high risk for waterborne disease. Yet, as history clearly indicates, the absence of uniformly provided water and waste removal services for all households, once epidemics begin, leads to a pattern of illnesses that do not discriminate as to socioeconomic classes. During the Progressive Era, approximately between the 1890s and 1920s, a concerted effort was made to promote improved sanitation and clean water resources the cornerstone of public health and sustainability. An important breakthrough in water provision and waste management services came with the establishment of public utility commissions at the municipal or county level, and at the state level in some states. The principal purpose of public utility commission management was, in the words of one typical statute, to provide services and facilities as shall be safe, adequate, and sufficient. While the regulation of water quality and waste management has generally become an accepted part of state and local government function, the methods by which these services are delivered have been the subject of some debate. In retrospect, it remains unclear whether the public provision through public utilities corporations of water and waste services led to improved public health outcomes beyond those that might have resulted from the private provision of such services. Some studies conclude that the private provision of water and waste management services produce outcomes similar to public provision. Additionally, critics of publicly provided water and waste management services charge that by centralizing the functions of water provision and waste management, local government became the sole consumer of a good, essentially a monopoly, which resulted in economic distortion and loss to both taxpayers as well as wage laborers working in utilities enterprises. While critics have not persuaded many state and local governments to abandon their reliance upon waste management and water provision monopolies, there has been a marked effort to increase resource supplier competition in states and local governments and provide for a more active governance role for utility service consumers. In the 1990s, policy entrepreneurs at the state and local level made a pronounced effort to use competition to improve service delivery, in the process often reducing costs to consumers. National policy has an impact upon water quality and waste management both domestically and internationally. Clean water standards are the principal means by which the federal government becomes involved in water and waste management issues. These two universally present local area services are important aspects for quality of life for existing residents and businesses, and for prospective new residents and businesses. Innovative communities will be wise to invest in the building and maintenance of superior quality water systems. While states and local governments began many of their public health sustainability efforts in the mid to late 19th century, the national government stepped up its role in this area substantially in the 1960s and 1970s. The National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, NEPA, the Clean Air Act of 1970, and the Clean Water Act of 1977, the CWA, gave federal regulatory agencies strong powers to establish standards in the area of water quality and waste management practices. Emergent from the CWA, the National Drinking Water Clearinghouse provides important information on water resources and waste management issues facing state and local governments and many individual property owners across the country. Without stifling state and local policy innovation in this area, federal action on water and waste management issues does serve as a tool to promote a considerable degree of equity of conditions across the nation. In Part 3 of this module, we'll discuss government buildings.